Welcome to the Pastor's Podcast.
Oh, we are the worst. If people heard, we are the worst.
The best. That was the first time, by the way. It's not like we practiced that.
No.
I just saw Scott's mouth open, and I felt it. I felt a pocket
because I have to wait like a couple of seconds to give Adam some lead in, and so there was a couple of seconds of silence.
Yep.
And you knew it was coming.
I knew it was coming.
Well, the giant head retraction, deep breath, and then the quick move forward.
Well, I was trying to signal, don't say anything else in this moment of silence, so I can actually get us started.
Which technically he didn't.
No.
That's true. It's true.
Did not say a single
getting
thing.
things started was the hard part.
Yeah.
With me today, our pastors.
Boo. Oh, we are the worst.
We're the worst. Especially Brian, but we are the worst.
It's funny for us because we're in this room.
That's right.
Everyone else is
it's like, they're like, okay, 2 times speed for the first 5 minutes, and then we'll...
That's what they're here for.
Don't bring it back to 1.5
The people are
speed.
here for this dynamic. They love it. It's a gift.
The people.
Yeah, la gente, el pueblo, the people. All of the people are here for this banter. It's what they live for. It's the water in their it's the water in their lakes.
You finished that.
That's our cold open. That's the cold open. The water in their
Finish my sentence, Brian.
Welcome to Cornerstone.
It's the air in their lungs is what I was
Dude, you had
go
3.
for.
You always go for the 4th. You don't have it.
I didn't have it. I'm feeling off today. We'll see.
So...
No, we need to start over.
Are we going to run with that?
No.
All right. All right.
We at least need to give Adam the option.
Okay.
We can't.
Why do you say that? This is good. This is
All right,
golden. What
all
are we
right.
talking about today,
Look,
Scotty?
Let's go.
What, Brian? What?
He's given up. He doesn't
I'm
want-
in.
He's 100% committed
I'm here.
He's committed.
Problem is,
Today we're going to talk about multiplication.
Yeah. 4 times 6, Brian.
Go.
I'm not doing this.
Wait. Can we race? We see who's the fastest multiplier. It's got to be Brian.
Why do you say that?
It's definitely not me, and this is not a good game to play.
It is
Matt,
a good game to
Matt
play.
will win this game.
What's the fastest multiplier?
Yeah.
Matt
Yeah.
knows his times
All
tables.
right. 7 times 8.
56.
Matt knows his numbers. He works with numbers all day.
Yeah.
We work with words. He
8
works with
times
numbers.
8.
Ooh, 64.
Yeah.
Oh, see, there was a tie.
I mean, kind of. I think he still won. He's still going to
13
win.
times 14, Brian.
No idea.
Well, I don't
Oh,
know.
I'm not even going to figure that out. So 10, 130, 13 times 4, 26.
That's the common
40,
core.
52.
No, that's not.
100. No, it's 52 plus 130. 182.
Nailed it.
We don't know.
Like
And
the
if we
universe
got out
doesn't
the
know?
phone
The
and
world
we-
doesn't know?
we
Universe
let
doesn't
No,
it-
know?
he's just saying that answer might be right and it might be
Well,
wrong.
if we got out the calculator to figure it out, it just devalues the entire game.
The value is funny. The square root of 259 times the square root
No
of
idea.
259. 259. Come
That's
on.
accurate.
Now, if there's anything that's going to get people to stay more than the banter, it's going to be math.
Math banter.
We're here
This
for
is why
math.
you're here.
All right, maybe we should try talking about a different kind of multiplication.
Oh, what other kinds of multiplication are there, Scott?
Oh.
Did you know there's more than one type of multiplication?
The pain Brian feels. The pain Brian feels in anything close, anything resembling or anything near cheesy. The pain Brian feels. He's so ashamed to be a part of it. I'm thinking he's not even gonna speak much so that his name isn't attached to
I
this.
can't turn
podcast.
this off because I'm in the room.
Yeah, you're in the room, but you could not talk.
Hi, I didn't see you there.
Oh.
I was just thinking about multiplication.
I was-
we can go that route if we want to.
You caught me mending my fences. All right, Scott.
That sounded. I don't even know what
I'm
that
assuming
means.
that's a deep cut
It is. I can send. I'll attach the link.
in the show notes.
Is it shown?
Yeah, it's a Will Ferrell joke from George W. Bush way back in the day. Go ahead, Scott. Let's move this thing along. Move this train along.
All right, multiplication. We're 5 minutes and 50 seconds in. We've got to get somewhere. We have a heart as a church to be a multiplying church, to be a church that sees not only the church multiplied, sees individuals, disciples multiplied, sees community groups and groups of people multiplied. And we've seen that in a number of different ways. Really, in one sense, Brian, this is kind of where we started as church planters. This is why you plant churches, right? This is why I didn't just stay in Simi Valley forever. This is why you come out of seminary. It's like, okay, I just want to get a job. But the reality is, God's created His church to multiply, to see the production is not the right word, but to see the making of disciples.
They call when you multiply two numbers together?
The product. So let me ask you this. I'm just going to ask questions. I'm going to stop even trying to explain it. The reality is God's called us to multiply. And this has been a part of the church since the very beginning, and uniquely a focus of ours over the last few years as we saw the South Bay church plant get planted, and a number of people who, again, like loved being here, who we love deeply, who had a conviction that the church by its very nature ought to be multiplying and replicating itself. And we're seeing this as we prepare for the next church plant ahead, with Danny and the Nathans and the Platts. We're going to be hearing more about that in the future. But should we start with why multiply? But actually, maybe not. Let's not start there. Let's start with.
Has anybody ever, if you're out there listening, have you ever experienced Scott verbally processing? Because what you just experienced there was exactly what that was. That was a classic Scott verbal processing, asking a question, answering his own question, changing the direction of where that question was going to lead us. I want to stop and just appreciate you.
Life with me is not verbally simple.
No.
It's not straightforward.
Yeah.
I've always wondered why this format even works, because it just seems like I would be a train wreck just trying to process things out loud.
Well, this is not
and then
a train
you're recording
wreck.
it all.
This is smooth.
What they don't know is I edit
rail.
everything. I ask a question and then I cut out all the processing and then I edit in splice in the answer 3 minutes later. When we record these, they're actually 3 hours long.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Takes up a lot of time. What direction, how would you like to approach this multifaceted, interesting question of multiplication?
I think we should tell the story of the last couple of years, the last 2 or 3 years, as we have committed as a church to multiplication over the long run, and how that came about even in the midst of the three of us wrestling through, thinking through how we should be engaged in that, how we should be engaged in the life of the church. Because this is something I think it's pretty fundamental to even how we're structured and what we're pursuing now in leadership as a church. But it's not something, I don't even think it's a story we've ever talked about publicly. Like it's the elders are an engaged part of that, but it's not something we've ever had a context to talk about. So at one point, 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, Matt, from this conviction, you had a desire to plant a church.
Yeah, I think, I always had this question in my mind connected to this, because when I was in college, I had listened to Francis Chan sermons, and Francis said, hey, we're planting a church in Santa Monica, and we were freshmen. Nicole and I were freshmen in college, and shot an email to Brian. I think Nicole shot the email to Brian, and we hopped on a big blue bus down to a prayer meeting over on Berkeley Street in Santa Monica, and that was before the church was even having out any sort of actual services. And so I feel like I've been really uniquely privileged to see a church plant from the ground up in that sense, which was Shoreline. And so I was young, no idea. The church I grew up in was relatively unhealthy and a lot of internal political fighting and stuff like that. I had even questions about the legitimacy of the local church at that point. I think I was reading a lot of Brian McLaren and emerging church stuff like that, and so just seeing discipleship and seeing community develop and seeing the way that when God's church focused on God, develops into a community, serving, loving, caring for one another, living out the one another's together, was such a compelling vision for me that I felt called to dedicate my life to that. And then was thinking about, the fact that God doesn't want us to take this message of the gospel and, to borrow a parable from Jesus and dig under the ground and bury the treasure and just hold on to it, but wants to see it multiply and grow. My thought is, look, Cornerstone West LA, after the merge, Shoreline, Cornerstone West LA is a great church, wonderful things, but everything God wants to do in Los Angeles isn't through this church, and we know that. And there's a reality of the fact that God wants to see this grow and spread, and that's part of from the beginning. What I see in Scripture over and over again. You read the New Testament, you see this. Jesus comes into the people of God, and there's this explosion outward. Go and make disciples of all nations. Right? There's this taking of this message and the intentional, purposeful spread of it. In different cities. You see this in the missionary journeys of Paul. You see this as he's planting churches in different areas and raising up elders and planting churches in different locations and dedicating himself to ministering and pastoring and shepherding different groups of people and raising up future elders. You see this in his letters to Timothy. You see this all over the New Testament, this tendency towards multiplication. You see it even you see it in the Old Testament. You see it as, I preached through Jonah a few years ago, and this sort of reluctant missionary sent out to the people of Nineveh. You see it even from the very beginning in the sense of be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, right? This is like a fundamental principle of Scripture. And so for me, as I was kind of making all those connections, I think biblically, seeing it throughout the story of the Bible, seeing it in this biblical theology of multiplication and spreading as not a cherry on top of Christianity, but as a fundamental part of what it means to follow Christ. That's where this and I had this unique privilege of seeing a church plant from the ground up. I was like, yeah, I think I should maybe multiply and be part of multiplication when it comes to churches and new churches and helping to reach the city of Los Angeles for the gospel with churches, with local churches representing Christ in different communities. Yeah. And so that's where I was 4 years ago. That's where kind of my heart was and my mind was and my thoughts were, and my preparation was moving really strongly in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And this had been a vision of, I think, the entire leadership of the church, of all the pastors for years. And we'd seen this in different ways as we reached out to different communities and had different language groups and things like that here as a part of our church. But the long-term goal was always to continue to see the multiplication that was taking place among community groups, right? And people would see this in their community groups. Their community group would grow. They'd have to multiply, and that's gone on for years and years. On one of the other podcasts, right, Steph Durr was talking about how over the last 10 years, she's been a part of 4 different community groups because this keeps happening, which is a part of the nature of
not splitting
discipleship, not splitting,
multiplying,
yeah,
very intentionally. In fact, splitting is dividing and is the opposite of multiplication. Just to clarify for everyone involved. Yeah, I wanted to plant a church.
If you multiply and get a product, you divide and get a... What do you get?
You divide and get a... What is that term? There's a term for it.
All right.
Yeah, I'll look it up.
And we should wrap that into our community group.
I'll look it up and I'll wrap it up. I'll wrap it up into it later.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I wanted to plant a church because I felt like Scott and Brian were holding me back, right? So they were holding me back from my true potential, and so I was gonna no. Honestly, but that's where you've seen it in the church. You see it as I don't know. I met a new couple today who was invited, and they were just coworkers with someone else at the church here, and that's like amazing. Like the message of the gospel just spreading and growing. And you see that in Colossians 1. You see all over the Bible once you see it. And you see it in our church community in so many different ways as well. These multiplication of community groups and multiplication of people. It's like the DNA of what it means to be alive as a church.
Absolutely. And so as we have sought to pursue that, and particularly more intentionally over the last 4 or 5 years, saying, okay, this is now a season after having been a church plant ourselves, after having been a merged church and going through that process, we kind of entered into a season where we said this is a time where we ought to be dedicating ourselves to sending beyond our church and to sacrificing as a church, and sending in this sense, like sending our best, right? Sending those who could be a huge blessing to be here long term. But there's a bigger vision than just building Cornerstone West LA. And so as we've stepped into that.
Wait, that's huge. I want to stop there for a minute, because churches nowadays, like the church community, the church, American church, can be so fixated and focused on institution building. Like, this is not any sort of particular criticism at any other church, but there can be a tendency in churches to kind of say, I'm going to build up Cornerstone West LA as a brand and an institution.
Yeah,
I need
we can't fit here. We need different,
exactly,
we need our own campuses.
Yeah. And there's so much, I think, about that runs counter to exactly what we see commanded in Scripture from Christ. And so I just, you said it quickly, but I just want to, we are not, our goal as pastors is not to build up Cornerstone West LA.
So are church plants allowed to use a different name than Cornerstone?
The church plant that is going out next year is probably not going to use the name Cornerstone.
What? Wait a second.
Yeah. They said they would like to name it Shoreline.
They're probably as close to the beach as we would have been if we didn't merge by now. So.
Yeah, Shoreline Church in Westwood.
Hey, man, we
Only
started on
6
4th Street.
miles.
We started on 4th Street.
We could see the beach when we
4th
started.
Street.
That
We
made
could.
sense for
It
at
did.
least 6 months.
Yeah.
On top of not being good at naming things.
Man. So
Truth class.
So interestingly, and I think this is actually a helpful part of this story. A couple of years ago, was it a couple of years ago now? Like your more immediate plans changed, and instead of kind of being a part of the next group that's being sent out as a church plant, Matt, you decided to stick around here for at least a little longer, and that might seem counter on the surface of it to what we've been talking about. But I think it's actually a part of it's a part of this movement that the Lord's doing, and the things that the Lord's doing in our midst. Why don't we tell the story about kind of what brought that about? What was it? Was that 2 years ago?
Yeah.
Was that early 2019?
It was like fall of 2019.
Okay.
So less
came
than
back
2
from
years
the
ago.
sabbatical. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Your sabbatical is 2019? Seems like a lifetime ago. Does it seem like a lifetime ago to you?
Yes, but everything before the pandemic feels like forever ago. So
Fair enough.
it all kind of melds into one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the question that comes up on the table, I think as pastors of a church, right, there's a lot of ministry and needs within the church at any moment, counseling and discipleship and organizational needs. And so there can be, it's easy to not be concerned or be thinking through multiplication. And multiplication is one of those things that doesn't just happen. It requires intentionality. It requires a particular focus. The other thing that I think we're so blessed with here is incredible, godly men and women, servant minister leaders in our church. Like you look around and for those of you who are listening to this podcast, if you're just kind of like a new person at the church or anyone, you look around at any of our community group leaders, any of our counselors, any of our teachers in different capacities, we have a church that is over and abundantly filled with godly men and women. And the opportunity that presents us is something along the lines of, hey, we have all these amazing godly men and women who could serve and minister and counsel and disciple in different capacities. And our tendency, as pastors, is we don't want to lose those people. We want to hoard them for whatever whatever purposes we might have here. But that goes again to that counter institutional kind of mindset and say, if God is giving us all these godly men and women, maybe this is the future of new church plants, new multiplications, new community groups, future missionaries, future ministry leaders, future pastors, future servant ministers in different capacities. And so to say that we have all those resources, and when we think about resources, when we use the word resources, 99% of the time, we're not even talking about money at all. We're talking entirely about the people that God has given us in this church. And we are over and abundantly blessed with incredible people. And so for us, we kind of looked at it a few years ago and said, but who's kind of like going to organize and help organize those multiplications? Who's going to help facilitate that? What kind of intentionality can that bring? And so for me, we kind of all praying through that, thinking through that, and kind of said, it looks like it might make sense for me as the pastor here to stay in Cornerstone West LA instead of going off and planting a church myself with a team, but to help facilitate those multiplications over the next 10 to 15 years. And maybe we'll send out 8 to 10 church plants over the next 10 to 15 years, and God will just multiply the gospel in different communities, different neighborhoods across our city. And so that's kind of the role that I'm kind of moving into in that sense, to really focus on how do we raise up, send out, facilitate multiplication when it comes to church plants. How do we use the time that we have to make an incredible impact for the gospel in the city of Los Angeles by sending out godly men and women to help lead and serve different communities across Los Angeles. And that's kind of where we ended up, instead of me going and doing that myself, which again, I feel called to and feel passionate about, helping facilitate that here so that we can do more of that across our city.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting because it has been a process that none of us saw coming, and is that theme that we keep repeating over and over again. But it wasn't what we saw coming. But then when we saw it, it was like, of course, this is what the Lord's doing, because we came to the realization, like with this tension, that Matt, like we really do have a heart, not just to plant a church, but to continue to multiply, to plant churches over the next 10 to 15 years. And we realized that with the size and responsibilities and capacity that we all had, we could send Matt out to do that. But, and I realized this in sending out the South Bay Church and kind of being the one who helped to just shepherd them in that. I could do that once, but I didn't have capacity with my other responsibilities here to see 5 churches go out, and then also training and filling the leadership holes in our church for our church. Because every time these people go out, right, it takes a huge chunk out of the life and leadership of Cornerstone West LA, and that's a sacrifice that we are happy to make, but it's still a very real one that we need to continue to fill in. And as we looked at our capacity and your capacity, I mean, it hurts like for real.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah.
And in a good way, but still in a very significant way.
Yeah.
And we realized that Matt could go out and plant a church, but that probably would be the last church we planted for a long time, if we didn't have the capacity
without somebody to
if we didn't have
facilitate
the capacity to facilitate this multiplication, to really invest in the coming leaders and the multiplication of those leaders. And so that's why I'm really excited about this, really excited about what is in store the next 5 to 10 years in the life of Cornerstone, because I think by his grace, the Lord has situated us to make this kind of multiplication a priority, not just not just in the disciple making, which it has been and ought to be, not just in community groups, which it has been and ought to continue to be, but also to facilitate this multiplication in the establishment and multiplication of local churches, particularly across our city.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, we have 10 million people in the county of Los Angeles. There is no way. I mean, we are so under-churched in the sense of churches per capita. There's not enough local representation, and if we are going to really purposefully reach this city, this county, this area of the world, it requires local representation in these local communities. We are never going to be some sort of major regional church that has, people driving an hour or 2 hours, and there's churches like that are out there, but we are a community church. We are a church that's invested locally, invested in the local community, and we are hoping to replicate that with the incredible godly men and women that we've been given here at the church to represent Christ in different communities across our city and across the county and maybe across the world. But there is such a need here that we see and such an opportunity for us to make that happen, and that we're excited about. We're extremely excited about. And maybe you listening here, you're wondering, I wonder if there's a role that you have in that. And the answer is 100%, because yes, you do have a role. 100%, you do have a role. Whether you go with a church or whether you send people off, we want to be a church community that has part of its DNA to be multiplying community groups, inviting new people in, inviting people who don't know Christ to come to know Christ. There's movement in the gospel. There's movement in our lives, and there's movement in communities. And so you need to be a part of that. There's a tendency for people to come to LA and say, I'm going to hunker down and find a place that I can just survive for the time that I'm here or whatever. And that's there's a strong tendency there. And so you might come here and you find a community and you're like, great, like I found a home, I found an LA church home that I can be a part of for some time, and I feel some comfort there. And that's fine. There's so much good in that, and we want to be a place of refuge for you. But we're not going to just be a place of refuge for you. We're going to be a place that sends you as well into your jobs, into your communities, into your neighborhoods, and maybe into other neighborhoods in the city for the sake of the gospel, because that's why we're here, and that's what God has called us to.
Okay, so that's perfect. I think this is exactly where we should go. Let's talk a little bit more about that, about what that means, because I think this is really, it's encouraging and exciting to think about it in the church as a whole. I think it's really... and there's so much more to the story we could tell, but I think it's super encouraging to see how that's played out in your choices, in your life, and how the Lord has orchestrated all of us together and given and uniquely kind of allowed you, Maddie, to have this focus in the years to come. How ought that impact and shape the lives of our people, of our leaders listening? Like what is that practically? I mean, you've kind of introduced it, like you kind of opened the door, but I want to wrestle a little bit more about like what for our servant ministers, what does that mean for just the average member? Like what does it mean to be a part of not just a local church, but a multiplying disciple making church? And what are the things that ought to be a part of all of our considerations as we think through life, even as we conceptualize church life, right? In this time and in this moment.
I want Brian to say something.
I mean, it's a big question, and you know me, I want to answer all of the things. But I think to start at the very beginning, in Colossians, it talks about how the gospel, bears fruit and grows. There's something in Peter, it talks about how like the implanted word in you bears fruit and grow. Like there's a way that by virtue of being a Christian, there's a growth that doesn't just take place in your individual life. That the kind of thing that God does in someone's life is not restricted to that person's life, but it catches them up in something larger that he's doing across time, across the world. And there's a tendency that we have to think of ourselves as looking back on what God did in the Bible in that way. And then God will do something again, like later, when there is really no discontinuity between how God was moving the gospel in the New Testament and how he's moving it now. There's certain means and things that we could talk about that maybe look different, but the reality is God is doing what he did then now. It's not different. And that's something that we don't talk a ton about and we don't think a lot about. We talk about it here in certain ways, but it's just not like something that feels like it's in the very center of how I was raised in the church, or just kind of the vocabulary you hear kind of if you're in Christian spaces. Mission is something else. Mission is something you do on top of the gospel. It's not implicit in the gospel itself.
Or something that really super Christians do.
Exactly right. Yeah, if you're really spiritually something, then you're going to go do it. And so I think the very first thing for like your average member or your average Christian is reconfiguring how you think about the life class, the truth class. It's reconfiguring how you think about yourself, the world, and the gospel. It's really thinking about how this isn't something that is like an action step or something outside of what's happened to you. It's not something you progress towards. It's built into the very thing that you already are a part of. And that's just a radical re-understanding and reorientation around the world. From there, I think you have to start talking about, okay, so that's going to look certain ways individually. It's going to look certain ways communally. And it's going to look certain ways like structurally for a local church. We've talked a lot about the structure stuff so far. But communally, it's going to look like a constant welcoming posture, a constant look outside of your community to say who else ought to be here, not simply because you want to add people, but because that's what the gospel is. It's something that grows and bears fruit. It's something that touches you and then reaches out to grab a hold of others. That's simply how it works. To deny that is to just mistake what it is that is happening to you. You're just missing an entire part of what it means to be a Christian and to be saved and what God's doing in the world. So communally, we have this posture towards that then is going to say, well, of course it's hard to multiply community groups, but of course we're going to do it. Like the of courseness is going to show up a lot more because of course there's going to be an extra chair in a meeting night. Of course it's going to happen. And then individually, it's the same thing where you find in LA, everyone is packed to the gills with their schedule. Everyone feels tired all the time, and it can be a very hard city. And we have to start to think about not just our posture towards other people and trying to add things to reach out. You have to start thinking about how it's in things that tire us that God meets us a lot of the time. It's in looking outward when it feels like all you can do is look inward, that you actually find the refreshment you were trying to find by looking inward. Not all the time. That's really complicated in different situations and seasons. And of course, all those caveats. But I think that's a really rare thought for me, as much as anybody is. I'm looking to find a sense of refreshment that my schedule, my life, the demands on my time feel like they aren't giving me. The idea of sacrificing of myself or sacrificing more of that is only going to take away. That's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you miss what God might do in that. And I found personally that when I do things like that, some of the time, maybe most of the time, I find myself more refreshed than if I had stayed home or if I had tried to recoup some of that. And that's, again, it's built into the gospel. The rest of the gospel is rest in a gospel that grows. And so you're finding yourself resting not in time off, me time or whatever. You're finding yourself resting in the gospel that grows. And so that a lot of that's ethereal, but I think you have to start with that posture stuff and that sense of what God is doing and what he's like and what the gospel is in the world, before you can start getting to some of the structural things. They're going to make sense, because you can't get the structure can't move down. We can't structure the church in such a way that it's going to make you have a different posture. But boy, if we have that posture and embrace it and teach it and love it and try and embrace it as a community, that structure can facilitate something just really amazing. I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I think that that's how it bears out, right? It's grown from the inside out. And I think as it does, it also helps us to recognize that there's not just an impetus to that type of multiplication, that type of investment in others, but there's also a huge amount of opportunities to do that. And I think that in the life of the local church, like if this local church was just about kind of maintaining, if it was just about kind of institutional growth, it was just kind of about being here, that there could very easily be an attitude of like, oh, look, there's like a dozen pastors. There's like 30 community group leaders. Like there's not really an opportunity, right? Like they don't need me to step up. Like I don't need to. And I think that's born out of a completely different assumption about what the local church is. And when the local church is this multiplying body, then not only are the opportunities there, not only is the need there, but then you actually see it, right? You see that no, community groups are growing and need leaders, need people to step up who maybe wouldn't have considered it otherwise. People need to be discipled. There are new Christians coming to faith that need people to invest in their lives, and that people are called to step into that maybe you otherwise wouldn't have considered, wouldn't have thought like, oh, that's me. And I think, and honestly, the same is true about elders and pastors. I mean, yeah, we had a dozen pastors like 6 months ago, or almost that, and we're sending them out, and we're multiplying, and we're in so many ways in need, in order to shepherd and faithfully shepherd the church family that's here. We were just talking about this the other day. Like we need more elders and pastors in the next couple of years desperately. Not only for the sake of multiplying, but even just for caring for the people here, like for both, and to make multiplication possible. And it reminds me of the fact that so many of the elders that have become elders in the last 5 years started by saying, I didn't think that was me, right? Like I wasn't considering that, I was looking for that. But, and I throw that out there because I think whether it's becoming a community group leader, whether it's becoming an elder, whether it's becoming a discipler, I think every one of us and everyone listening has just some assumptions they carry with them they don't even think about, that help them assume that oh, maybe that's me, maybe that's not me, right? Those types of things aren't me. Like maybe I could help out this way, but I'm not gonna ever be a community group leader. I'm never gonna be a pastor or elder. And the reality is that I think in a church that's multiplying like this, that there's probably a lot more of that. There's a lot more of people that are thinking that now that maybe didn't take the opportunity to rethink that, to have conversations. I was like, hey, wait, how does God want me to sacrificially participate in this multiplying work that he's doing?
Yeah. And I think that goes back to, sort of Brian's point about the posture versus the structure, because we tend to think of it in those structural terms of official titles or official roles and those kinds of things. And the way you get there, the way that is impacted, the way that the culture of the church, the structure of the church, the way that the church is different is by you as members of the church, as regular attenders, as people who are part of the church community, growing in that posture and carrying that with you. And I think that's really key, because that's where I guess when you're kind of talking about kind of the people who are saying, I don't think that's me, or I'm not sure that I could do that. The reality is, the question we want every single member, every single person who's a part of this church asking is, what does God want me to do? What does God want in my life? And when you start asking that question, you ask it not just about your job and your vocation. You ask it about your church community. You ask it about your neighborhood. You ask it about what city you live in. You ask it about how you interact on a Sunday morning. You ask it about all these different arenas and different areas of your life, your family, and all these other things, right? You start asking that question, you start realizing the answer is oftentimes, God wants me to love and serve and reach out and be hospitable and invite these people in and have a posture towards them of selflessness. And most of the time when it comes to church community, most of the time when it comes to thinking about the church, there's a tendency, and this is true in our church and any other church, there can be a tendency towards a more consumeristic mindset that says, how does this serve me, and how does it do this, and how does this help me, and what do I get out of this? And you read the New Testament, you read what Christ calls us to as Christians, and it radically undermines that completely and says, no, this is not about you. Like, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to love you, I'm going to refresh you, like you're saying, Brian. But the question you need to be asking is, what is God using me in this arena for? How is God going to use me in this community group? How is God going to use me? A new person walks into your community group. They take it to a real practical level. You're sitting there, you're just trying to maybe in the season you're trying to just reconnect with people. You feel so disconnected. A new person comes into your community group. The immediate thought can be, another person to get to, like, how hard it's like, all right, I'm already having a hard time connecting with these people, and another person is in the community group. And I get that. Okay. I get the posture. Like, I understand why you're feeling that way. But God calls you to something very different. God calls you to a posture of welcoming in that context that says, I know this is not my first instinct, but I want this person to feel welcomed and loved. I want to ask them how they're doing. I want to get to know them. I want to be the person who reaches out. And you might say, well, when I joined that community group, no one did that for me. Well, then now you can do it for somebody else, right? Like, there's a sense of posture behind this. And I really appreciate that word you used, Brian, because there's a sense of posture that is a call towards multiplication that I think really changes a lot of your interactions on a Sunday morning. You're sitting next to someone you don't know. Instead of turning to the person you do know, turn to the person you don't. Like, there's so many things about that are maybe very much feel like a giant mountain to climb for you. And I get it. I understand. And I'm not calling you a consumer. I'm not criticizing you or condemning you. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the posture God calls us to in the context of the church, in the context of your community group, in the context of your neighborhood, in the context of your workplace, in your family, in all these arenas is, how do I selflessly serve and invite into the life, this growing gospel message that's growing in me and spreading out from me? How do I invite people into that? And if you have that posture and that mentality, our church community, number one, is going to be radically different. Our church plants are going to feel like the most obvious things in the world. You send out a church plant, it's not going to be like, oh, why are they sending those people away? That's weird. No, it's like, this is what happens as a Christian. This is what we do. You multiply. It spreads. And new people are invited in. You're not best friends with the same people. You're not like, it's not a group of you and your best friend in one community group for the next 40 years and you never have new people involved. This is part of what it means to be a Christian, that these relationships grow and change and new people are invited in and it spreads out and you're sent out. All of those things are part and parcel of what it means to follow Christ. And I'm kind of rambling here, but there's like a passion here I have for this that I think is oftentimes missed in the context of a church community and is relegated to those special elite class of Christians who are going to go out and plant a church, when I need and I know that God has called Cornerstone West LA to be a place of multiplication, whether you're going with a church plant or whether you're not, a place of hospitality and welcoming and that gospel spreading in us and amongst us and out from us, that I think is really crucial to what it means to be a healthy church. And so that's why I think it's part of a passion sort of across the board for me.
I think it's really well said. That's really well said. And I think that's part of what we just want to convey to you as you're listening, a bit of our heart for how the nature of the church is a multiplying family, not a static one, and one that changes constantly by its very nature as it multiplies and grows, and as the kingdom of God continues to spread in his city, in this city and beyond.
And that's where the joy is found. I think that's it. It's just so easy to have this conversation. I'm thinking about people listening too and leave it and go, yeah, like we need a sacrifice, that's true. Like, I think that's right. We do need to sacrifice, but let's not pretend that the sacrifices God calls us to are not also where he puts joy for us. It's very inappropriate, I think. And that's how, in many ways, how I found myself for a long time. It's like, you know what? That the sacrifices are important because they're sacrifices, and that's it. And Christian sacrifice, and there's a way of hearing everything we've said and be like, yeah, let's get passionate about that sacrifice. I think that there's ways that's true, and I want to encourage some of that, but I also just want to remind us all that's where the joy, for the joy set before him, despising the shame, he endures the cross. Like there's a way that we look at the things that are hard for us, that aren't life-giving for us, don't feel life-giving for us, and just assume that we should avoid those. And I think that it's just a giant mistake. The things that don't feel life-giving for us are often the very places that we are leaving a lot of life on the table.
Because it's the joy that is there, just like you talked about today in the sermon, the joy is a result of following Christ. It's that fellowship with Christ and letting him lead you into those callings, into the commands he gives us, that's where that joy comes from. and trying to get that joy without following Christ doesn't work. And this is what Christ is leading us into. And so there's a sense in which it's connected directly to our relationship with Christ to begin with, like you talked about today.
Yeah, how foolish to think that we're going to write a better story than God's going to write that gives us more life and more joy than the one he's prompting us towards. It's just not foolish in a condemning way, just like, man, like, wouldn't it be, how much more free are you when you just say, yeah, I'll follow wherever, because I know that you're going to provide the things that I need. And even when I'm lamenting, and even when it's really hard, where else am I going to go? You have the words of eternal life. There's just so much here that's not about just how hard it's going to be, but it's important. It's about how joyful it is. And even now, if you've listened to this podcast, how many times have you heard the three of us, a bunch of different people, just look back and go, I'm so much happier now that I didn't write the story of this church or of my life. And the idea that, but now I'm going to clamp down and really make sure I'm controlling what comes next. I know that there's different people in different places. I know that some people are just trying to survive right now. Like, I get all of that. But inside of wise decision making, let's just not forget that God never asks us to do something, to have a posture, to give of ourselves in a way that is not ultimately something we're going to look back on and say, I'm so glad we did that. And this is what that is. So for those of you who are struggling, who are busy, who are thinking this is hard, it absolutely is. And as the introvert at the table, I'm right there with you. But man, I don't want to leave joy on the table. I really don't. And when I'm at my best and I'm thinking the clearest, it's when I say I want to have that posture, because I don't want to leave that joy on the table. I don't want to not be able to look back and say, oh, what an amazing thing. I'm so glad I haven't missed out on that in the past, and boy, I don't want to miss out on it in the future.
So good. Well, why don't we leave it there and leave you with that? And I think our encouragement is to, as you hear about opportunities to multiply, whether it's at a community group level, whether it's at a church level, where it's these upcoming church plants, or even just inviting people into your life, pray that you would be striving after that joy, not leaving it at the table, leaving it on the table, but taking hold of that which the Lord has prepared for you in it. So thanks for listening. We love you. We love getting to be a part of this multiplying community with you, and we'll see you on Sunday.